Hey, thanks for joining me again. Jake Claver here on the Block Biz. Today, I wanted to go into the impending liquidity crisis that exists in the markets and all over the globe, but specifically in the crypto markets, and how that could impact the financial system, what they could do to shore it up. Just my 2 cents on maybe what happens. Turn this away from you guys. So, where do we start? Well, let's start with what is liquidity? What does that even mean? How liquid is an asset? So when most people think about liquidity, they think cash. It's very easily spendable. It's a currency. You can spend it on whatever. Anybody takes it. It's a very liquid asset. And so when people talk about how liquid something is, it's how fast you can exchange it for something else of value. A home or a residence, a car, a lot of other assets are illiquid. So if you own a home, you would have to exchange your home for currency or something else to sell it to most people. You're not going to be able to exchange your home for another home of equal value 99.9% of the time. Most people are not going to do that. They're not going to want your exact house for their exact house. It's this very illiquid market. So you have brokers and other people that sit as intermediaries in there, and they will broker deals. You have realtors that go out and find things, and they'll negotiate. You'll have lenders in the same market that will shore up the difference between this house and that house. You can also move from one piece of real estate into another piece of real estate through a 1031 exchange here in the US to avoid taxes. There's a lot of workarounds that exist to make the real estate market more liquid, but it's still very inefficient and illiquid. Most of the time, it takes between 30 to 90 days to sell your home. And then the same thing for buying another home. It could take 30 to 90 days, sometimes even longer, depending on the process and the issues that you're having. Cash swap, instant, right? And that's what people want. They want liquid assets on hand so that they can buy deals when they find them, pay for expenses as they come up. So what is a liquidity crisis? A liquidity crisis occurs when trust is lost. So 2008, this is a great example. The banks used to lend to one another because they thought that the other bank would repay them, right? And when Lehman collapsed in 08, they were out of options. They were so levered up with other stuff. They went to go ask for money from other people to cover obligations that they had, and nobody would lend to them. They were very liquid. They were locked into what they had, couldn't get cash, failed. This happens with businesses that I work with. So sometimes you're doing really well and you need a influx of cash to continue to do well. An example of this would be you buy a bunch of inventory, you sell through all of the inventory, but you haven't recouped the cash from the people that you sold it to on a 30-day note, right? So maybe you extend them credit. They buy it from you, they have 30-day terms, and they don't pay you back. So you can't restock because you don't have enough capital on hand. And the demand's there. You could be selling to more people, but you don't have enough cash flow you're not liquid enough to cover the expenses of new inventory. So liquidity is very important for banks, for companies, for individuals, all those pieces. So in a liquidity crisis, all of the capital is locked up somewhere where maybe it's making money, maybe it's not, maybe it's losing value, and you need liquidity from somewhere else. You need a loan, you need more capital coming in to cover expenses that you're having or to be able to repay the debts that you have so that you can sell some of the assets to recoup the capital. And that's what you're having happen with a lot of these governments at this point. Central banks, you have a bunch of other banks that are all levered up at this point. And we had this happen in 2008, and the government came in, the Fed came in and bailed the banks out here in the US. China, they're already doing that. The government has stepped in. They're manipulating markets. to hold up some of the real estate companies that are very levered up there, but they're almost out of options there. And so what could we do to make these markets more liquid, especially if there's so much leverage in the system that there could potentially we could potentially have an ICE 9 event. So what is an ICE 9 event? Jim Rickards gives a much better synopsis or definition of this than I'm going to. Mine's going to be crude, but I'll go ahead and give it to you. It's basically where cash and financial institutions lock up. Money is no longer available. They won't extend any credit because they don't have any credit to extend and they can't get it from anybody else. They're so levered up that everything locks up. You won't be able to get money out of ATMs. There would be a very scary moment in time if you went to your ATM and you couldn't get cash out. The banks were locked up. You couldn't spend on your card. There would be pandemonium. And that's an event that he talks about happening because we're at the point of no return with the amount of leverage that's in the system. And when the lender of last resort, the Fed, is over levered like they are, they've got so many, well, and we'll talk about this. There's a balance sheet, right? And you've got one side that has a bunch of liabilities, outstanding payments, loans, interest, all that stuff that they have to continue to shell out. And you've got this side that's assets that they own that they're using for the income, taxpayers for the Fed, to pay out all these expenses on this side. And the Fed is in a position where they can print money into existence, which we as individuals would love to be in, right? But with that becomes a lot of power, and people tend to abuse that power, and that's really where we're at this point. They've printed it into oblivion, and their mandate is to hold a certain inflation rate while also stimulating the economy by making sure jobs stay at a certain level, or employment stays at a certain level. And that's a tricky line to walk. I do not envy the Fed and their ability to print money because of the mandates that they must uphold. And they are the lender and buyer of last resort. But I think that time's come to an end. I think the IMF is really going to be the final lender and buyer of last resort. So they will have to step in and shore up the system. They will have to revalue assets. And so that's how they've done this in the past. When there's been a liquidity crisis, trust is lost in the system. They will revalue the collateral that's being used, which right now there's none. we don't have anything backing the US dollar. So they'll have to go back to some kind of system where things are asset backed, and they'll have to revalue those assets significantly higher so that they have some room that they can print more money to shore up the system. And they've got digital assets now. So with CBDCs, they can actually stimulate the velocity of money. What is the velocity of money? How fast money moves through the economy. So I pay my membership here at the shop in Dallas. They pay their employee. That employee buys some groceries from the store where they buy the groceries. They pay that employee, and then he goes and uses the money to pay for a cab or some other service. You could have money flowing through the economy at a significant pace, but right now, if you look at the velocity of money, it's the slowest it's ever been. Everybody's hoarding cash and holding on to it because they're uncertain of what's going to happen. Similar situations, what happened in 2008. And again, this causes illiquidity, right? People don't want to lend to other people because they don't know what's going to happen. If people are certain, and there's certainty in the markets and people understand probably what's going to happen, then they're willing to spend. But when there's uncertainty, people cling to cash. And so you're seeing savings accounts. Well, you saw savings accounts during COVID jump way up. Now we're back down again below where we were then here in the US. And then you have credit cards being run through. That's the highest leverage debt at this point that there's ever been in the system for credit cards. Same thing with business loans and everything else, because when they printed all that money, the consequence of the Fed printing more money to cover their problems is that inflation happens. Things cost more. The amount of things in the system are accelerating, but not at the same rate that the amount of money is. And so costs go up because there's the same demand. Well, there's the same amount of supply on the market and more demand because there's more dollars in existence for those same things. So if you took economics, that's kind of how that works. You have a supply and demand graph, and you meet on here, price is over here and goes up based on supply and demand and where they meet. So what can we do to shore up the system? Well, I just talked about that briefly. We would go back to money that is backed by some type of collateral. I have my speculation that it'll be gold and energy. So gold and oil, they'll peg those at a certain ratio, and then they will use them as collateral to back CBDCs in certain ratios. And then you need something that allows things to be swapped trustlessly, right? Because now all these countries, they're not sure if those assets are actually there. You need them to be auditable, and then you're not sure if they can pay. So if they have debts that are outstanding, you need some way to make sure that you're going to get paid on the other side, and it's not an IOU. So you need a DEX of some kind that swaps between their currency and your currency, and you get yours on your side, and you're good. You know it's backed. That's what the XRPL is. That's the XRP ledger. And ILP, which is interledger protocol, connects all the banks and all the systems, and has a value agnostic asset, which is XRP, that sits in the middle of those transactions. So you sell whatever you have into XRP, send it on the ledger to the other person. They get it. It's good for whatever they have. They swap it into whatever they want, and they go about their day, and it happens in 3 to 4 seconds. Boom, with cost almost nothing. So anything that is tokenized on the ledger will also work in a similar fashion. So I talked about the illiquidity in the real estate market. Imagine you tokenize real estate on there, and with the NFT, it's fractional. So previously, it would have been very difficult to account for fractional pieces of real estate and those being exchanged through a system. But with blockchain, it's an immutable ledger, and you have it all right there, and it's all those transactions are verified. I think transactions per second on the XRP ledger, the throughput's like 15,000 TPS, transactions per second is TPS. And it can scale even higher than that, depending on some of the different protocols that they have in the background. So all of those transactions, even for fractionalized real estate, would be accounted for, and you would know exactly how much and who and when and what the cost was and all those things all the time. People cannot account for that. You need software to do that. And so what that'll do is it'll make that market much more liquid. You have brokers that do this. Again, the software will remove a lot of the brokers that exist in the system. You have that right now, the intermediary between the clearinghouses who own all the stocks and sell all the stocks for private equity and the retail market. Actually, not private equity, but the retail market. They sell to brokers, and the brokers sell it to individuals, and the brokers make that market liquid, right? Same thing with the real estate broker. They've got this guy that wants to buy a house and this guy that wants to sell his house, and they make a connection, and they make a fee for doing that. But there will be software in the future that makes those markets liquid without the brokers, and it'll do a much better job than what they do, because it'll be able to plug into all these APIs. You don't have to have, this giant network of people. You'll have all the people on the network, and they'll tokenize their assets on there, and there'll be market makers that are built in that will source liquidity, which really just means they'll source whatever you're looking for on the other side of the transaction for you. So that's the technology that exists. We have a liquidity crisis happening right now, and I hope that we don't get to an ICE 9 event where the system actually locks up, but they have the solution for it in the background built out. And I believe we'll implement it hopefully prior to that event occurring. But we are headed for a potential event like Jim Rickards talks about, where banks lock up, they freeze, and markets are locked up and frozen. There's no liquidity in the system left, and no places to source liquidity from, except for the lender of last resort, which will be the IMF. And they have an SDR, which is a basket of global currencies, the world reserve currencies. There's 6, I believe, that sit in that basket, and they're weighted differently depending on the GDP of each country. but that's a topic for another video. So I believe that they will use a revaluation of assets to shore up the system, use those assets as collateral to back currencies, and reinstate trust across countries using that and the decentralized ledger technology and DLT that we have with the XRP ledger that will allow everything to be transferred trustlessly and provide more liquidity because of the market makers and the DEX that exists. But DEX is a decentralized exchange. Again, sources liquidity from all the things that are tokenized on the ledger and makes the swaps and makes them, it's a market maker, basically. Inherently, also, when this transition takes place, there will be a revaluation of the asset that's used to move all of these things. And XRP will provide the liquidity to move all of the assets that are tokenized on the ledger. So all the CBDCs, all the real estate, all the stocks, all the different things that will move onto the distributed ledger technology or the XRPL will be swapped through XRP. And that's what will cause the price of that to rise. So they won't even need to revalue that. If they have that on their balance sheets and they're holding on to XRP, it will offset a lot of the debts that exist on the other side, just because they're holding an asset that repriced itself significantly higher by using it. They won't even have to revalue the asset like they did with gold in 1933 when they took it from the American people and then, took it from them at $20 and revalued it at 35. And they continued to edge that up until it's 42 and some change on the Fed's balance sheet today. And then Nixon removed us from the gold standard or closed the gold window in 1971 on August 15th. That stopped. So hopefully we'll have a reinstatement of the gold window. Our currency will be good as gold again. And trust will be restored to the system, because without trust, you have very illiquid markets. And without certainty on how we're going to move forward, you have uncertainty and people hoard cash, and the velocity of money is very low. And that causes, again, illiquid markets. So I'm sure there was some jargon in here that was a little over some people's heads. Please comment below and let me know what you think. If you do have any questions, I'd love to answer them, engage with you guys on YouTube. Please like, subscribe. I haven't said that on any of the videos, but if you feel like this content's good for you and you're learning something here, I would love to have more people or have this reach more people. So with that, I appreciate y'all, and we'll see y'all on the next one.